Hello, everyone. It's that time again. Dr. Joseph Capps coming back to you again with our podcast and our YouTube channel, Dancing with the Darkness. If it's your first time listening to this, we welcome you. Do us a favor before we get started. If you could like and subscribe, it really helps us out. If you're doing the dance like most of us with the algorithms and all of these other things, it's very hard to get our voice heard out there. And we're only here to help individuals. So anyone who wants to like and subscribe and comment, if this is meaningful to you, it really helps us, and it helps the population out there that is dealing with PTSD, CPTSD, trauma, anxiety, depression, all of these unfortunate things that so many of us deal with. If this is your first time listening, like I said, this is a raw, unapologetic rendering of what it's like to live with CPTSD. I've dealt with this my entire life, and I've gone all the way from childhood to later adulthood with this, and it is a journey not only of pain but also of redemption and hope. And that's why we're doing this podcast and this YouTube channel, because I want to not only help you understand yourself and what you're going through, but I want you to understand that you're not alone. And most of all, I want you to know that there is hope. And I'm not talking about false hope. I'm not talking about the gurus that are out there that tell you to do this and tell you to do that. There are some great tools that we do share that other therapists and psychologists and psychiatrists out there, coaches even, that are sharing. But I want to give you something much more meaningful, which is actual stories of redemption and hope, so that you can see that it is absolutely achievable. Okay? The other thing that we do that is a little unique as opposed to what else you see out there is that I do come from the point of faith. And I'm very strong in my faith and devout in my faith. And I cannot without a shadow of a doubt, represent any hope or any redemption or any of those redeeming qualities that have happened in my life if I don't acknowledge the presence of God and Jesus and what they've done to help save me. That's where the ultimate power has been, which has equipped me to do this podcast for you today, to share that journey, but also to have the strength and the courage to share my own painful story and have no fear of judgment or anything else. I'm completely transparent, and I have finally gotten to the point of radical acceptance where this is the life I've had and there's nothing to be ashamed about. So today, we're going to go into another attachment style, but we call it, for the purpose of CPTSD, I think it's much more accurate to call it not an attachment style, but an attachment strategy. And the reason why is because over the years in my lifetime, I have adapted different strategies depending on the relationship. And so a lot of times we see not just one in particular style, but we see a gamut of all of them. And I have had anxious attachment issues, avoidant attachment issues, and also probably the most prevalent would be what we call disorganized, which we're going to probably have to do 2 videos on that, because disorganized is very complex, and you can see, hey, that kind of fits with complex PTSD, doesn't it? It's a lot of polytrauma and various traumas, and so they affect different parts of the body, different parts of the brain, and so it makes sense. Once we start tying science and faith and experiences and knowledge all together, we really can kind of piece this together. And the first part, obviously, of anyone starting to even attempt to get well is that we need to have some understanding. We need to have some understanding of what happened to us, how we got here, and why do we have these attachment strategies in our relationship. And we cannot talk about CPTSD without talking about attachment. This is a huge part of what CPTSD is about, because it delves into what we talked about a little bit last week. It's all the way from the developmental trauma in the womb up to where we are now, and how we form these attachments. So today I'm going to talk about one of my all-time favorites. Oh yay, avoidant attachment. Okay, and we're going to talk in particular. I'm going to give you the differences, but we're going to talk in particular about what's called a fearful avoidant attachment. Because when we talk about CPTSD, we're going to see more of the fearful avoidant attachment versus the dismissive avoidant attachment. Okay, and so basically what happens from the developmental end, what we need to understand is that when we get into what's called a dismissive attachment style, this is going to be more about somebody being kind of a solo performer or a lone ranger. They value their independence, and often they can even see relationships as even an unnecessary burden. Okay, and so we kind of come from the same place developmentally, but then it takes a radical shift when we go into the fearful side of things. Okay, so a dismissive attachment style a lot of times develops out of not necessarily complete and total abandonment like we see with the anxious attachment style, but it's been more about, parenting style of, put your big boy panties on, toughen up a little bit. So the parents are present, but they're not very caring. Let's just put it to that way. They're not extensively nurturing. Okay, so we see that a lot in dismissive attachment avoidant styles or strategies where this child has developed into a way that they need to be independent. They need to rely on themselves more. But at the same token, they're not completely dysfunctional and they're not completely dysregulated because their parents were present and they weren't necessarily abusive, but they were a little distant, a little aloof. And this is very common. We see, I remember when I first was a parent, the advice that you always get from the previous generations, which of course, I'm not going to listen to the advice of my mother had passed and my dad was still living. I'm not going to listen to that advice because, I'm like, okay, well, y'all did a fine job with me. So, right. So, but more and more and more you would hear when the baby was crying, when my daughter would cry or, then after that, my son and then my next daughter, when they would cry, you had this whole mentality of just ignore it and they'll stop. And so I unknowingly was actually doing something right. I didn't know that I was doing something right at the time, but I got criticized for it. But I was that type of parent where I could let them cry for a little while, but if they wouldn't stop, I just couldn't stand it. And so I would have to go pick them up, nurture them, love on them. And I did not know that I was actually doing something right. And it's one of the many miracles, I think, in my life because at the time, I was not 100% well. I was, flying by the seat of my pants in fatherhood, trying to do the best I could. There was still a lot of wounds there. There was still a lot of trauma there. There were tendencies that I had to be very careful of so I didn't act like my parents. So this is in the, in my naive part of my life where I was just kind of going through the motions and I was doing my very best. And I got criticized. I remember getting criticized by my mother-in-law, by my wife, by relatives, hey, you're making that kid spoiled and everything else. It turns out later in life, as I start studying all of this developmental psychology, I realize, wow, and I take a deep breath, right? Because I was actually doing something right. I didn't realize that at the time, when the child was unable to self-comfort themselves, that they absolutely needed something from their parent. They needed the nurturing. They needed the assurance. And so I may have done a lot of things wrong as a father, but I can at least look back on those times and know that I actually did something right because I could not, for long periods of time, let my kids cry. If it was 10 minutes or so because they were fighting sleep or something, that was fine. But if it lasted longer than that, I couldn't do it. There was an issue. Was my child afraid? Were they in pain? I don't know. But I couldn't do it. I was, and I got accused of being a softie and spoiling my kids and everything else. But long story short, we need to understand that as children, this is a lot of times how that avoidant attachment style got started, was that we did let them just kind of cry themselves to sleep, or get to the point. It's beyond self-comfort at that point. It becomes more of a war of attrition. Okay, so the child literally wears themselves out and passes out. So their need was never met. And so the developmental part is that we start seeing a more independent child, because they start thinking that, you know what, I'm not going to get what I want when I cry, so I'm just going to have to figure something else out. Okay, and so then we only would see them cry when there was a major issue like an injury or something like that. And then, as you get older, with that toughen up mentality from your parents, we see that eventually we start getting to the point where we don't tell our parents when we're injured. We don't tell them when things are going on in our lives, because we expect them to be aloof, or we expect them to just tell us, hey, you know what, don't cry about it, toughen up. I was told that toxic masculine bullshit my entire life. I'm sorry for my language, but that's what I was taught. I was taught you're weak if you cry. I'll never forget when I was 11 years old, they had these two bullies in the neighborhood. They were twins, and they were like 16 years old, and they terrorized us, okay? And so I got this new BMX bike, which was a big freaking deal back then because it was expensive. And, I was with my single father, and he worked hard for his money. So this was a major purchase for me to get this bike for Christmas. And it was like, okay, I got you this bike. You better freaking take good care of this bike, kind of thing, right? So these guys proceed to wreck me on my bike, wreck me. And I go home crying, and my father is like, I'm not letting you in this house until you deal with it. And I'm like 11 years old. I'm like, what in the hell am I supposed to do, right? Well, I'll tell you what I had to do. He had this great big crate that had been shipped back from Vietnam, believe it or not. All of his stuff had been shipped back in this big crate from Vietnam, from the Vietnam War. And all of my sports equipment was in it. And in that was a Louisville Slugger bat. And so the only thing I knew to do at that point was I went up there and I swung for the fences. And one of them got away and one of them did not. And all I can tell you is that when I was done, it was easy to tell which one was which. They didn't look identical anymore. I'll put it to you that way. It was bad. So they go off to the hospital. Their parents come with police knocking on the door. I come up from behind my dad's leg because my dad was a massive man, and here I am, this little 11-year-old, and I peek around, and the parents are like, that's your son? And he's like, yep, that's my son. And they're like, yeah, we're not pressing charges. Sorry to bother you. I guess they were ashamed that this 11-year-old went to town. The unfortunate thing is here, not only had I learned that I have to solve my own problems, but now we have another problem. Now I discover that, maybe you can solve things with violence. Not a good look. 70s, 80s, it wasn't so bad because we were still in that mentality. Even the police were in that mentality that kids should just go in the street and beat the hell out of each other and shake hands and call it a day. If it would be today's time, I'd be in freaking bars, looking out of bars. Okay, so there used to be a joke that I would say, and I even would tell my kids that, and it was not healthy, but I would tell them that violence is not how you solve your problems, but it's a good start. Ha ha ha, right? But it wasn't. It was toxic. It was a toxic thing to tell my children. I didn't want them to be victims. I didn't want them to be bullied. But I always did assure them that I'm not going to be like my father. Somebody's messing with you, you come to me and I'm going to deal with it. And I didn't want them to think that I was going to go Hulk smash everybody either. I wanted them to understand that it was going to be diplomatic. And that's how we handled things, thank God. diplomatically. We let the schools or anybody else know that we're not going to tolerate this. And then, of course, I taught all three of my children early on how to fight. Because if you got in a corner and you had to come out swinging, I wanted them to be able to do that. Okay? So I just want you to, I'm just trying to show you how this avoidant dismissive attachment style takes shape. I'm going to concentrate on the fearful avoidant, which, believe it or not, is a rare attachment strategy. But we have to talk about it with CPTSD because this is going to be, it's going to be between the fearful avoidant and the disorganized many times that we see with CPTSD, because we're talking about cumulative, developmental, and polytrauma. So when we start talking about a fearful avoidant, this gets really insane, okay? It gets really difficult. And let me tell you, because I spent many years with this fearful avoidant attachment strategy. And so now what we have is we have the desperation for connection that we saw with the anxious attachment. So we desperately want connection. We desperately want to be loved. But at the same time, we're terrified. We are terrified of the loss that can happen. We're terrified of other individuals hurting us. And so even if we started into a healthy relationship, we end up in a very unhealthy relationship because we start to push away or sabotage the very thing that we're desperate to get. And I can't tell you how many times I would start catching feelings for somebody and I was like, man, I got to get the hell out of here. And I pushed and I pushed and I pushed. And then eventually the person is like, man, I can't deal with this guy anymore. He's like a freaking roller coaster ride. 1 minute he loves me, 1 minute he doesn't want me. It's very, very difficult for the other person in the relationship as well. We need to understand what this looks like. As opposed to a dismissive one, we are yearning. We are literally yearning for that connection, that same connection that we didn't get from our parents. And from a developmental standpoint, the difference between that parent that I was telling you was just kind of like toughen up mentality. The parent that was either avoidant themselves and had a hard time getting close to their own child, or maybe they didn't know how to deal with your emotions because it triggered their emotions. What happens is not only do you not get the nurturing, not only do you not get the comfort, but you actually start learning that your feelings not only don't matter, but that your feelings are causing other problems for other people. Okay, so you're trying desperately to suck in and suck up something that God has obviously created in you. He's created you to love. He's created you to be in fellowship. And you're literally having to do everything you possibly can within yourself to suppress this, because you've developed and been brought up into this ideology that, number one, my feelings don't matter. Number two, if I have feelings, I'm literally causing someone else to have problems. Okay, so then we start developing that toxic guilt and shame on top of everything else. And we start to think that, if I get angry, there's going to be a consequence. If I get sad, there's going to be a consequence. Okay, so you can imagine how the inner critic starts moving in big time. And then here comes the outer critic, like we talked about last video. They're going to come in and they're going to try to basically tell you that everybody in the universe, they're either going to hurt you or you're going to hurt them. Okay, so you see the difference between the anxious attachment that we talked about and now this fearful avoidant. We're not just fearful of the other person hurting us. We've developed this ideology and thought process that we are going to hurt someone else. If I get feelings for this person, or if I exhibit feelings for this person, if I expose myself to this person, I'm going to cause them harm. Okay? So then the guilt and the shame comes in. And that's talking to you along with the inner critic, telling you, hey, dude, you can't be in a relationship, man. You're not stable. They're either going to hurt you or you're going to hurt them. This just isn't in the cards for you, so you need to get out of here. So, you have on one side of the coin this intense feeling of love and connection for this person, but equally on the other side, there's this tug of war because you start to feel this horrible fear of rejection. It turns into these highs and lows like you're riding a roller coaster. Every interaction with this person that you're seeking connection with, you're literally seeking or looking for disapproval or abandonment. Okay, so you see how the sabotage starts moving in, because if we really go analytical on anything with a person, especially in a relationship, you can find something. Okay, maybe their eyebrow twitched funny, or they did this when they were talking to you. We can, they probably were passing gas, but here we are with this fearful avoidant. We're like, oh, look at that, I saw the eye, they don't love me anymore. Okay, and so here's, it doesn't matter what career we end up in. I'm telling you, the fearful avoidant is a bricklayer. Okay, so put it on your resume. Put on your resume that no one can build a wall better than me. Okay, nobody's getting through this wall. Okay, we joke about it in America. Put the wall up on the borders and everything else. Well, if a bunch of avoidant, fearful attachment strategists went and built that wall, there's nobody getting into this country. Okay, I need you to understand that. So we can add that to our CV or whatever, that we are a master freaking bricklayer, because we've been doing it our entire life. We've been building walls between ourselves and any kind of connection. Okay, and it's just really, really tragic. We can resort to indirect communication that's very, very confusing to the other person, and it can also be passive aggressive. We end up seeing out of this, when you see narcissism, a lot of times it comes out of this avoidant attachment strategy. Okay, we either see this avoidant strategy that makes the narcissist who they are, that's more of a dismissive, hey, screw everybody else, I've got this. Or we can see extreme perfectionism, to the point where this person is so type A that they can't be in a relationship because they drive everyone out, because if all of the T's aren't crossed and the I's are dotted, then this relationship isn't healthy. So it's kind of a push-pull dynamic, and it's extremely hard to deal with. It's hard to deal with as the avoidant, but it's also so hard to deal with for anybody that's in a relationship with an avoidant, because they really just don't understand this fear of vulnerability that you have. It can be very confusing and frustrating for your partner. Sometimes, the expression walking on eggshells, that really fits it. It really fits what we're talking about here. One thing that I want to mention is that also with this fearful avoidant attachment style, these are the individuals that we see that are really resistant to getting any kind of help. I did it for years. I couldn't believe that there was anyone on this earth that's going to understand me, that's going to understand what I'm going through. Basically, we are right at that hopeless arena. And I did reach hopelessness a few times, and I did some bad things, but God chose for me to live. Okay? And so this is why I'm doing this podcast and why I do my channel and everything else, because God did choose me to live, and my story and my testimony, I hope and pray it's helping someone out there. But I just need you to understand, from an empathy point of view, if any of you are going through that, I completely and totally understand. I completely and totally understand getting to the point of complete and total hopelessness where there's nothing in this world that can help me. There's no one that's ever going to understand me. There's no one that's ever going to love me. And, even if there's somebody that's going to love me, I'm going to screw it up because I don't know how to love myself. Okay? So it is a push-pull dynamic. And even though we desperately need to get therapy, whether it be for anxiety or depression or whatever's going on, we just don't want to do it. Okay, we just have no hope whatsoever that any resources are going to be able to help us. Okay, or we have this whole mentality of false hope, which is really scary, right? To have this glimpse of hope, this little light coming through the darkness, and then it gets completely and totally void and turns black. Okay, so that's our mentality. It's very, very scary. We start to see some hope. We start to see some light, and it becomes a bigger push-pull because now we have more to lose, right? The more I feel, the more that I love, the more that I covet or attach, the more of a loss I'm going to have, right? So let's be safe. Let's play it safe, right? Let's just, okay, I've got this baseline level of misery that I've lived my entire life, and you know what? It sucks, and I don't like it, and sometimes I just really don't want to wake up in the morning, but hey, you know what? I can survive, right? I've survived it this long. I know how to navigate these stormy seas, right? That's our mentality. It's not healthy. We need to tap into something a little bit bigger. You know, this is why I bring my faith into this, because I had to understand that, number one, Christ was sent to this earth to love. And he did that with sacrifice, and he did that with acts of service, and he did that with provision. He was a loving, compassionate, empathic person. But he also was tough as nails, because what he went through up into his death and his death, I can't name any person in this world that could endure that. And so this is how I learned that if Christ could love through all of that, and he could be on the cross at the very end, and he could have said, hey, Dad, can you just freaking zap these guys with lightning? But he didn't. He said, God, please forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. That came to me in such a humble and such humility that's what began to dismantle the walls of my heart, and to realize that if Christ was capable of this, I'm capable of this. And also, I had to start having faith that just maybe there's another person on this earth that's capable of loving me for who I am, right? And so that's how we have to start breaking out of that avoidant, fearful attachment. Now, there's going to be things that stick with you. I'm still very, very independent. I still have a very hard time asking for help. I still sometimes have an element of control where I think that as long as I can control it, it's going to be okay. As long as I do it, it's going to be done right. I still have, I won't say fear, but I have some maybe fear feelings about relying on someone else, right? Because they could fail me, right? So these things are still there, and the key is we have to be ever aware of these things, okay? And part of that is we have to learn to be present within ourselves, okay? And so I have to understand and acknowledge when these feelings come. And so there is a double-edged sword here, okay? The positive side of this is that it helps us recognize individuals that will fail us or hurt us, okay? We're very hypersensitive to it. And that's not a bad thing, to protect yourself or protect your family or whatever, because you can see the wolf in the sheep's clothing. But we have to be very, very diligent with the fact that there are other good people in the world that God has put on this earth, and they get the same sense of purpose and validation that I do by helping other people, okay? And so I have to look inward and realize that a lot of the joy that I get in life is anytime I can help another individual. It makes me feel like I have a purpose. It makes me feel validated. It makes me feel like I'm doing what I was called to do. And so we have to kind of look at it that way. If I'm refusing the help of someone else, I may be hurting them because that may be the same thing that they need. Maybe they've been through a lot of things, and it would bring them great joy and peace and strength if they had the ability to help me. Okay, so I just kind of want you to start learning how to look at both sides of that coin. Okay, and we also have to get out of the mentality. Many of us were brought up in the fashion, just like I was with that BMX bike. You know, I have done this for you, and so you owe me for life. Okay, you're going to encounter many individuals that are selfish in your life that are like that. I'm not going to say that you're not, but there are genuine, giving, loving people that all they want to do is to serve others just like I do, and they want to give because it gives them joy. And that's very personal to me because that's how I am. I never expect anything in return. I'm not doing things for other people because I want something in return. I'm doing it because it gives me purpose. It takes my brokenness, and it takes my wounds, and it takes my pain, and it makes it positive. It gives me the ability to enrich someone else's life, even if it's just a stupid dad joke that I tell and it makes somebody chuckle. It doesn't matter. I desperately find myself wanting to be someone that enriches other people's lives, does not drag them down, does not contribute to the darkness that we're dancing with all of the time. And so if you're identifying with this, and this is really speaking to you, I want you to understand that that's the hope. The hope that is going to heal that fearful abandonment, that fearful avoidant attachment, is that once you learn to step out of that fear and to use your experiences to help other people, and you see the joy, or you see the product of that, of what your service does, it's going to give you the ability to understand that there's other people out there that need the same thing, or that God has put here to do the same thing, which is going to give you the ability to receive. Okay? We can't just give. Okay? That's another video. We can talk about compassion fatigue all day long. Okay? It doesn't get us anywhere. We have to allow ourselves to fill back up, and we have to understand that we can do that without a sense of I owe that person for life, because it destroys the blessing, it destroys the act of service if we accept something and then we ruminate on, well, man, I owe them now, how am I going to pay them back? When this person is probably just like you and has absolutely no expectancy in return. They just want to do something nice. They want to care for someone, and it gives them purpose and validation and peace. Next time, we're going to talk about disorganized attachment. It's going to take us a couple videos. Out of all of the attachment strategies, this is the one that I have the most familiarity with. It's the one that has been the biggest part of my life, and so I encourage you to tune in. I have a lot of my life story to share to give you some really good examples, but at the same time, I have a tremendous amount of hope and redemption that I want to put in these videos also, so that you can realize that it's never too late to crawl out of this pit that we're in and to start experiencing a better life. We're never going to be perfect, only Jesus was. But I tell you what, we can go from existing to actually living. And that's what I want for each one of the listeners that chooses to get on our platform. Once again, thank you so much for listening. Please like and share, subscribe, whatever's on your heart. We welcome your comments. We welcome questions. If we can help you in any way, please let us know. I'm very good about replying as quick as possible. God bless all of you. We're praying for you, and we'll talk to you next time.